There we go. All right. Sorry for the delay. That's just the nature of this thing. It's really frustrating. But what we need to do is there's actually students, different students take this course for different reasons in terms of distance. There's actually a student today that's in Hong Kong, or not Hong Kong, but Beijing. Anyway, so they can't even get YouTube. But I have to have it in variable formats for different audiences. So that's just kind of the nature of it. Also, if you notice under the materials section, you can see that I loaded the videos. I thought, this is going to be great. We'll be able to collaborate videos within the program, and then I found out there's a 100 megabyte limit, which is kind of a joke because no video is 100 megabytes, or most videos are much more than that. So anyway, we'll work around all these things, and it'll as we move through the course, we'll get used to it, and we'll try and work with the program. It's got to be done through Collaborate. It's got to be done through Blackboard. Those are just the constraints. There's a lot of students in this class. Well, a lot by UAA standards, like 80. So in order to do that, it needs to stay fairly organized. Apologize, I've got a bit of a cold today, and actually I took some NyQuil, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, my daughter came home from college, gave me a rotten cold, flu kind of thing. So anyway, we'll get through it. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is we're going to do the introduction to, we'll actually cover a couple chapters tonight, and we'll also talk about some of the syllabus items. The way this thing works out is I should be able to see chat coming up down in the area. I can see people who are checked in, participating. And then up here in the room, there's another information. But again, my point is not to make this, like a situation where you got to, check in all the time to get your attendance points. But if you do have a question, please say something. But believe me, there's a lot of folks that are, for one reason or another, can't be here for the sessions. Let me see. How was your trip? I don't know that I took a trip. But anyway, somebody else is talking about a trip. And anyway, people join the main room. Let me see if there's any other comments before we get going. Sometimes, worst case is, one time I did half a lecture with, out the audio. We really wasted a lot of people's time, including my own. So if something really stupid like that happens, please let me know. So yeah, it looks like people are maybe chatting amongst themselves, which is great. Anyway, if anybody has any questions related to me, fire them up. But otherwise, I'll just sort of glance over there unless I see something that pertains to me. So anyway, let's get going. So operations management, most of you are at least familiar with the concept. This is a little bit about me. I've got some Beaslas around here. You'll probably see them jumping in the video here at one point. Bailey's the mother, daughters, horses. It's typical Alaskan stuff. I was career Air Force. This wasn't my, this was my first regular airplane. I flew F-15Es afterwards. We had some new puppies this year too. I just bought an airplane. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. It'll be great. But anyway, it's in California, so that's a project. This one is obviously daughter. I guess is probably more important. So Jamie and Katie, myself, Bailey again, Red, and Chief, and her daughter. So anyway, enough of that kind of stuff. But you're going, okay, why is a career Air Force guy teach you this? Actually, what I did was a lot of logistical type stuff. I flew for probably first 10, 12 years, and I was over in Europe pretty much the entire time after that. So over half of my career I spent in Europe, and what I was doing was setting up logistics stuff. So running stuff from mainly out of Luxembourg, getting that stuff down to the Middle East, and then I did a bunch of stuff in Eastern Europe, Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, folks like that. Anyway, got my MBA there. I got a PhD now, and then I started doing consulting work. So do strategic consulting for another company called Booz Allen Hamilton. They're pretty big and Fortune 500 kind of company, and really well respected in that regard. So anyway, I've got a pretty good background in the subject, and we'll come across more examples as we go through. In terms of the course syllabus, you should be, obviously it's out there online. So far on the Blackboard, wow, what chaos that was. I sent the email and the syllabus and everything, and everybody's happy. And anyway, I'm sending it all to the fall course. So if you were wondering why you got all your stuff so late, that's because it went to the wrong course. So that's corrected now. You can look on there in the syllabus section. You'll see that. You'll also see in the assignment sections where you'll turn in the homework. And then in the materials section is the actual lecture that you got here, and then the videos. So this is the first time I've taught this course distance, so there's going to be some growing pains. To tell you the truth, this class is, there's a lot to discuss, and it's kind of a fun class. But with a distance format, there's not as much interaction. Plus, there's not a whole lot I can tell what's going on in terms of get blank stares or whatever. All I get are kind of blank text, so it's not as easy to figure out what people are whatever, how well they comprehend the subject. The exams, there'll be two, I guess they're midterms or exams or whatever you want to call them, but those are going to be done via Blackboard. It's just going to be easier that way. I was kind of pushing to do it all via proctored exams, but it's just going to be a mess. If it would be kind of an ordeal for everybody to come in and sit through a proctored exam each time, just to organize with those folks. It's not the most easy, not the easiest process. But the final will be comprehensive and it will be proctored, so we can say with some certainty that you know material if you do well on that final. Homework. 20%, and attendance in class type stuff, 10%. So there'll be the homework, and then there'll also be some extra things on the side, and that'll kind of register as your attendance thing. Supposedly on this log, I'll be able to say, who attends the lectures and who is doing it, and the technical word for this is synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous being you guys who are here right now, and asynchronous people who have to watch it at a different time. Anyway, my intent's not to penalize people who can't be here, because those weren't the rules going into it. I mean, that's not why you sign up for distance. But just the same, I'll try and come up with a fair format for that. Generally, though, homework and attendance, I'm pretty lenient on grades. So usually my students do pretty well because they get typically a 30 out of 30 between 20% for attendance. 10% for attendance and 20% for homework. Not cool talking there. Anyway, any questions on the syllabus? We'll talk more. So, without further ado, we'll jump right into the actual subject. So, operations management itself. So, production, the creation of goods and services, and operations management is the set activities that transfer goods and services by transforming inputs and outputs. So anyway, my intent's not to read the slides here, but we do need kind of a broad definition regarding OM. What we'll focus on a lot in this class is I'm going to try and incorporate a little bit more quantitative type stuff into it when it's appropriate. Sometimes there's some math shoved into this course just to give you math, and it's we've all taken statistics and we've all taken some of those other courses, so I'll try not to I'll try to make it relevant when it's appropriate. But another area we'll really concentrate on is quality, and quality in the sense of the word that everything done in manufacturing is focused from the eye of the consumer, and so every action that's taken to a product has to be traceable. It has to have some value added for the ultimate customer, or it's considered waste. So, and it shouldn't be done. It's also considered defective, which is kind of a strange thing. That was a 15-year-old dog out there. Sounds like he does it all the time. You probably didn't hear it. Anyway, next slide. The different decisions. Okay, so I'm not going to test on lists and dates and names so much, so don't worry too much about that. But this is kind of an overview of what we'll talk about in class. So these could actually almost be chapters, and we'll go through them and we'll talk about them over different weeks. But design of goods and services. So these are the strategic decisions that are made. Managing quality, which I already talked about a little bit, and we'll talk about that throughout it, because quality is a huge overarching issue that really doesn't get as much attention paid to it as I think it should. Process strategy, how you're actually going to set up your manufacturing location, where your facilities are going to be, and why. Human resources, obviously the most complex, most difficult situation. More businesses, especially like in restaurants and stuff, and a lot of the work that you all have probably been exposed to, at least on your initial jobs. You saw the human factor and just how difficult it is. From a management perspective, if you've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to do that, and I don't mean to say that it's something to be avoided, but it's certainly not a low time type issue. It's something that's going to consume a lot of your time. Supply chain management. So again, and that focuses back on quality, just in time, some of those aspects. Inventory management. Basically, inventory management in a nutshell, from the standpoint of this class, and quality and everything else, is inventory is something to be avoided. If you can not have inventory, if you can be like an Amazon, for example, and just have like a virtual type store, never take title and never hold inventory, that's ideal. So inventory, just to the extent that it's a necessary evil. Scheduling, how to actually get things done, and then maintenance. Maintenance is something, again, in the course we'll talk a lot about technology and how that's impacted the ability to do maintenance. And so we'll spend some time in that area towards the end, but there's a lot of things that have emerged in that field. There's some video clips that are out there. So the one that we just jumped by there, Frito-Lay. Frito-Lay it's almost like a Frito-Lay commercial, unfortunately. But the authors are obviously pretty tight with these Frito-Lay people. So you'll see Frito-Lay used as an example. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm not saying Frito-Lay products are the best or whatever. But what I am saying is that the way the companies run is pretty remarkable. I mean, like them or not, one Frito pretty much tastes like the next, regardless of where you are nationwide. And they're dealing with products that are, especially everything can go wrong in a product in terms of difficulty. Frito-Lay would see it. You're dealing with a perishable product. You're dealing with a product that's, subject to quite a bit of processing. You've got a consumer that's, anyway, we'll talk more about it as we go through it. But when you watch that video, you'll kind of gain appreciation for some of the 10 steps. They'll run through those, and they'll talk a bit more about it. But the authors are kind of over with those guys. I've got a nephew who works for Frito-Lay, and believe me, it's like a company culture that's pretty dominant. He won't go to a restaurant that pours Coca-Cola because Frito-Lay and Pepsi are together and all that, and it's just a whole mindset. It's more military than the military was. But anyway, you watch the video there, and some of the homework will tie back to Frito-Lay, but they do a pretty good summation of the overall aspects of operations management. So operations and productivity. So again, this is another list. Like I said, we're not going to test on a list, but we will discuss, what happens: planning, organizing, staffing, leading, controlling. Sure. But again, these things demonstrate themselves as as you actually do OM, so it's not necessary to list them out. Some of these critical decisions, design of goods and services. So they're going to run back through these definitions that we just talked about, and we're going to spend a week on each one of these. But again, these guys kind of elaborate a little bit more on what we're talking about. So, what products should be offered, how do we define quality, and again, quality does not mean the most expensive or even I don't know. When you say the highest quality product, generally people think the most expensive product. Sometimes it's the same. You get a store like, say, Nordstrom's or something. I mean, they do conduct themselves in a very high quality manner, and also they're, whatever, they're fairly, well, not fairly, they are a pricey store. But you could also have a store, I'm trying to search for one, I don't know, maybe somebody more mid-range, maybe Fred Meyer or something like that even though they might not be at the top of the price level, they might be very well run and very focused on what the customer wants. And the customer in that case does not want, $200 pair of shoes. They want, whatever, or whatever you get at Fred Meyer. So anyway, it's not always the most expensive. Probably a better example is in one of the videos they're going to use here in the course. They're going to have the Ritz-Carlton as an example of quality. Well, again, it's kind of misleading because Ritz-Carlton obviously is going to be very high in quality, but very high in quality in both senses of the word. So something like a La Quinta or something like that might also strive for quality, but again, they're not in the same price level. And I'm not saying I'm a big fan of La Quinta, but I'm just saying that it's not always the most expensive. It has to do with analyzing processes and not analyzing and not necessarily the most expensive product. So it'll make more sense as we go. Capacity. So we're going to talk about forecasting. We're going to talk about how to anticipate what's to be to produce, what's going to be produced. But you also have to make sure that the process that you're setting up can deliver the capacity, because there's usually a finite time window. There's a product life cycle that occurs, and if you can't crank out the capacity you need during that time, you're leaving money on the table, and maybe by the time you get to the capacity you want, now your product is maybe not obsolete, but demand's starting to wane. Location strategy. So where should you put a facility? This depends on really whether it's a manufacturing facility or a service retail facility. So we'll go much more in depth in this, but again, manufacturing, they want to be out in the sticks where things are cheap. It's all about cost. And revenue, or service and retail, they want to be where they're going to generate the maximum amount of revenue. So they're willing to pay high rents and be in a high traffic location, because it's about revenue, and they can pay the rent based on that revenue. So anyway, next, layout strategy, how they arrange the facility, human resources. Again, pretty complex subject. We'll spend an entire week on that. Supply chain management. And there is a make or buy decision in there, but there's an overall strategy to the whole supply chain that's more than just that. And then inventory, material requirements planning, and just in time. So just in time manufacturing, or just in time anything. Scheduling, immediate short term, and then maintenance. Like I said, the maintenance stuff it's more than you think. I mean, there's a lot more management that goes into maintenance than and a lot more opportunities for improvement by employment of technology. So that's pretty interesting. Again, no dates for the course specifically, but there are some things that have happened. Now, the big takeaway from this is that the book and some of the videos try to portray everybody prior to this sort of enlightened age as being kind of morons, but the truth is that it's all based on technology. People knew a lot of the aspects of quality and just basically being focused on the customer a long time ago, but they didn't have the technology to employ it. So when Model Ts came out, they were all in the same color. If they would have had the internet, well, obviously people could have ordered and they could have done this efficiently, but back then it would have been total chaos if everybody wanted different colors and you're processing orders, and now your Model T no longer, is cheap. It's pretty expensive because you've got all these silly costs that from the aspect of the consumer don't really add a whole lot to it. Now, because of the ease and the technology involved, the setup costs and the ordering costs and all those other things are way down, so you can really cater to the customer. So the big takeaway from this is the primary guy in here is Deming, and Deming was actually a Ivy League kind of guy, and he came up with these ideas, or not came up, but kind of reinterpreted ideas regarding quality, and didn't find much of an appetite for them here in the States, especially because the big three was, for lack of a better word, kind of smug. They were pretty much set. Car sales were good. It's back maybe early 70s, and then the wheels kind of came off. But anyway, years prior to that, people like Toyota, post World War II, they were starting from scratch, so they were eager to embrace ideas like Deming. So Deming goes over there after the war, and the U.S. really didn't have a problem in terms of automobile manufacturing until probably the early 70s. 73 was probably the worst year ever for all those kind of vehicles. Anyway, after that, it was kind of too late for the U.S. They've tried to reinvent themselves, but it's difficult. There's still opportunities to do that now, but it's going to rely more on automation that's going to change the equation in terms of the labor cost aspects of it all. So anyway, takeaway from this is, there's been a lot of history to this is OM in general, but I would say more in the quality aspects, Deming and the innovations in terms of quality. So they're showing quality control Deming in the 50s, which World War II. We'll spend a little bit of time on Toyota because they are kind of a model in a lot of ways. But again, don't associate the fact that quality is an Asian type concept, because really the person who was pushing it was from here. And I'm not trying to get nationalistic about this. I'm just saying that the good ideas have been around, but in this case, the Japanese, through the end of the war, were basically starting from a blank slate and were more receptive to these ideas. New challenges to O&M. Yeah, a lot of these things are anyway. I think the authors give themselves more credit than they're due, or they give more credit to managers. People have wanted to do some of these modern type concepts, but without technology, it's kind of hard to do mass customization if you don't have computers. So it's not necessarily the folks' fault way back when that they couldn't do that, like I said. And low bid purchasing, now you go with fewer shippers and you lower setup costs and all the rest of that. So we'll talk more about it as we go, but I'm not going to say that the people before were not so bright. We will talk about goods and services, so it's important that we kind of have a definition of each. So goods are, tangible products, something you can actually put your hands on. But what it makes a difference on is the attributes. So, if somebody says, that's a good, for example, a good iron, with few exceptions, we could probably agree on what makes, one iron better than another. Which is important, because with services it's more difficult. Services are more, the quality is defined by the user, so it's tougher. We'll look at that in a second. Production separate from consumption. So like I said, with a manufacturing plant, you might want to put it out in the middle of sticks because you're not selling from the factory. You want to manufacture where it's cheap, and then it's sold off in some market at a different time and place. You can inventory it, which again, services is tough to do, and low customer interaction, just like I said with the other item where services. Let's look at service because it's just a little easier. So when you're thinking about services, think about maybe like a haircut or something. It's intangible. You produced and consumed at the same time. Unique. One person's idea of a good haircut is not the same as another's. So, and that's the high customer interaction. People always ask you, how do you want it done, or whatever. I mean, some people are more particular than others. I just got my haircut today. Obviously, you can tell I'm not very particular, but oh well. Inconsistent product definition. So again, I think it's a good haircut. You may not. Knowledge-based, especially you get like a dentist, a doctor. I'm not going there, but yeah, they bring enough grief on themselves. But would not say that. Frequently dispersed. So people are not going to drive. If you decide to put a grocery store out in the middle of nowhere, it better be pretty darn cheap because most people are going to go to the one in the neighborhood. So services are normally close to the customer, and there's very little benefit to being centralized. Okay, so there's no this shows overall that the percentage of services in manufacturing. So what they're trying to do is show, oh yeah, the U.S. is in serious trouble because our manufacturing's down, our services are way up. But and you look at a place like China, but the situation though is fairly fluid. You've had cycles and ebbs and flows and things happen that will always change this aspect. But as a percentage of GDP, well, the percentage of GDP is not necessarily going to take into account the labor factor, but automation will change this. Automation may actually bring some manufacturing back to the U.S., the U.K., and some of these other countries that have highly skilled workforces and also high labor. The highly skilled workforces is necessary to operate and maintain and program the automation, and but there's not that many folks employed, not at all. But the labor component, the cheap labor that may have drawn people to China, that's kind of going to be brought down a bit by the fact that the automation doesn't require a lot of labor. Overall, though, you're going to see the number of personnel involved in manufacturing worldwide go down because as some factories that are, I think they call it reshoring now. Anyway, that are coming back to the United States. Textile factory, for example, I think they employed 2,000. They came back as an automated plant, same location, and now they have 150 people. So a whole different thing. But those 150 people, I mean, they're getting paid more because they're doing higher skilled work. So manufacturing and service employment. So obviously service is going through the roof. Manufacturing too, productivity, which is obviously a factor, or automation is obviously a factor. So people become more productive. I mean, if a guy's manually making some parts, that's going to be take a few more people. But if he's has a machine, his productivity is going to go up, and the number of people though involved are going to be somewhat less. Manufacturing employment. So again, industrial production, manufacturing. So production's going up and employment is going down. Changing challenges. Some of this has more to do, and I'm not an evil person, but this public concern over pollution, corruption, and all this. A lot of these things has more to do with access to information. There are a lot of companies that did some bad things overseas, but they did, and they could kind of get away with it. Now, when bad things happen, the public can find out about them quite a bit quicker. So that has led a lot of companies to change. And then sometimes there's also some marketing pitches where, let's say they're going to, make a car lighter because they don't want to use as much materials in it. Well, they'll pitch that as being more environmentally friendly. It sounds better than we're going to give you a truck with, thinner metal and thinner doors and thinner everything. They'll say, oh, no, we're not doing that to save money. We're doing that, to make it better, more socially responsible. The whole Subaru thing about. Anyway, cars can't love people. But anyway, growth of reliable, low-cost communication, transportation, so local, national focus. Yes. Shorter life cycles. All this stuff is very true. There was so much friction, so much inertia caused in product development by the change process and just keeping track of it, generating forms and paper trails and all that kind of stuff. Now, it's just not necessary. I mean, it's basically a software change. If you're a modeler or a draftsman, you're hurting. There's not a whole lot of work for you because most of that stuff now goes from the engineer and directly to a 3D printer if you want. So the life cycle of products, you can introduce changes and improve the product continually. And one of the aspects of quality is continuous improvement. So that has certainly improved. CAD is computer-aided design. There's some of these terms. Don't get too wrapped up about them because the terms are even becoming outdated. Because computer-aided design, there's also computer-aided manufacturing. Well, now it's just becoming standard manufacturing for the most part. The actual draftsman kind of person is more the anomaly than the. Anyway, that's becoming more normal. Low cost production, a little concern for the environment. ISO 14000. Again, some of the stuff kind of rubs me wrong because some of these things were actually put in as more of trade barrier type things. I know in Europe, for example, they did not want to use certain products that weren't didn't meet with their environmental standards. Well, it's also because they couldn't compete against them, and they've done some things that are maybe not the best. When I was in Germany, for example, the Saar River that defines Saarbrücken. Anyway, it defines the German-French border. They used to have all the steel plants there. Well, they moved all those steel plants, to get rid of that carbon footprint and everything else. But what they do now, that steel. I mean, they're still making the same number of Mercedes and Audis and Beamers, but now that steel is made in China. So you're not fooling anybody. I mean, now that stuff is made in China, where the factories are far dirtier, and then it's shipped over. So anyway. But in terms of environmentally sensitive, production, green, the other aspects about that is if you are producing a lot of waste and a lot of that kind of stuff, you're not being very efficient. So green manufacturing is usually pretty efficient manufacturing, and so when it's economically driven, that's where things are really sustainable. If it's artificially imposed, then it's probably not going to last. But if it's a market-based, consumer-driven, attribute, then that's much more valuable and much more relevant. Mass customization. Again, this has more to do with technology, increased influence, individualism, to a certain extent. But a lot of this has to do with people being able to reach out and order stuff online for a large extent. Recognition of so empowered employees. Yeah, that's part of quality. Smart people have always done that. It's not there wasn't an epiphany that happened. It was just that smart people have always known the best way to get the most out of their employees is by treating them well. Rapid technological change, competitive forces. again, this is just, business, being affected by technology and being able to be improved. Shorter product life cycles. Again, when you have the technology, you can improve the product continually. You don't have that friction, that inertia, that cost of that's associated with redesign. You can just change a little software and boom, the parts are coming out. Also, it means that you don't want big stacks or warehouses full of parts, because then when you do come up with a better idea, it takes too long to incorporate it. So you want to have very lean, very just-in-time type operations. So I think we hit all of these. Again, these slides get a bit redundant, but we'll try and get through them. Productivity. So productivity is a ratio of outputs divided by the inputs. So obviously improve productivity. So yeah, it's not a measure of efficiency, but it's the ratio of those two. So there's lots of ways to increase productivity, but basically it means doing more with less, or with the same input producing more too. So anyway, increasing productivity is often a factor of automation. Not much to be said. I don't give them credit for management being the main factor in increasing productivity. I put it up to the technology. Now, important part to capture here is when they're talking about productivity and they're looking at a place like Starbucks. Okay, Starbucks, if you're going to Starbucks and you're paying $5 for a cup of coffee, all these things about saving 8 seconds and save 14 seconds and save, you got to look at it from the customer's point of view. A customer can go someplace and pay whatever, $2 or whatever for coffee, and if that's what Starbucks becomes, where they're running some production line and they're just shoving stuff at you, in fact they may have already became that, but anyway, that's a problem for them. So these savings need to be pretty transparent to the customer in terms of their Starbucks experience. Or if it's something like this credit card, that is pretty huge. I use a credit card for everything, and the fact that I don't have to sign, that's a win for me. So that stuff is good. Changing the size of the ice scoop, well, is that how's that translate to the customer? And this new espresso machine, yeah, but what happened to the quality of coffee? So I would be more concerned with not just the time, but I'd be more concerned with, again, from a quality perspective, how's it perceived by the customer? So yeah, you can save a whole bunch of money, but if you lose a bunch of customers, you've got problems. So you do want to follow up on productivity improvements and do the best you can, but you also want to assess what effect that's going to have on the product. And the product in this case is an experience. Obviously, it's not just coffee. It's got to be something more for that price. That's how you do the calculations. So there will be one of these, two of these, whatever on the test. Not a big deal. This is pretty dead easy math. So 4 units of labor per hour. And it's obviously it can get more complex. You can put multiple factors in here. Not a big deal. Labor, material, energy, capital. So I think that's what they're trying to capture there. The quality may change, the quantity of outputs and inputs remains constant. But anyway, you definitely have to be aware of why, what this looks like from the customer's perspective. Now this is this bit again where they contribute 52% of the annual increase. This will not be on the test because I do not necessarily agree with that. Again, it's the reason why these people are able to produce more is due more than just management. Key variables for improved productivity. So, education, social. Education and some of these other things die of the labor force. Anyways, some of these things, they need to be appropriate to what you're trying to produce. I lived in Turkey for a number of years. I was there probably, 3-4 years, and there were some simple tasks that they could get done, based upon the people's education. In fact, they were probably less bored with some of the tasks than, people could be overeducated and they wouldn't be able to perform the task. But yeah, if you try to get your average Turk guy that we were paying, $7 a day to do software, yeah, you've got issues. But if you're talking about taking care of horses, what this guy was doing, it was not a factor. So again, it's got to be appropriate for the labor force for the job. Anyway, they get into some stray issues here. Service productivity. This is more difficult because it's not the automation factor. Is there's certain things you can automate, but in services it's more difficult. And nobody, you think about a haircut again, you can't really automate a haircut, or at least you wouldn't want to. Difficult to mechanize, often difficult to evaluate for quality. So just like all the other attributes we're talking about services, that it's a tough one to do. But that being said, there's plenty of people who thought, these service jobs are secure because they can't be automated. But look at automated tellers, look at grocery stores now, travel agents. It's all those things. There's services that are being automated all the time. So, but for the time being, doctors, dentists, people like that are fairly safe. Productivity at Taco Bell. So they go through a quick example here. And again, this gets into an example of a business where there is a huge number of outlets, huge volume. So it makes sense to go through and evaluate each little item. But for most of us, not the case. So anyway, what they did was, cut prep time by this, conserve. But again, how does this translate to the ultimately for the customer? Ethics, social responsibility. Again, we'll talk more about ethics as we go, but sometimes the authors just sort of plug this in at the end. All right, I realize we're probably going to go about an hour 15 tonight. We'll probably spend about a half an hour on the next one. It's just the YouTube videos, if they get too long, become more of a problem. The nature of this course is what I want to do is have probably about an hour video and then the chapter reading and then the videos for yourself. So we'll see if we can't keep it to that. But we will talk about globalization. Our global environment. If you have any question about, well, we're all pretty aware that we live in a global environment, and sometimes some of these things are not necessarily done for, does France make the best passenger doors for Boeing jets? No, not necessarily, but France sells Airbuses, and we need to sell Boeing jets there, and we need a constituency to help us out on that regard. So yeah, we're going to order our doors from a company in France. You know what I mean? So that's why a lot of this stuff is done. The same thing with the salt. They also have some things in Germany as does Deal and some of these other things. Airbus is a European consortium, part of European air defense sector. Anyway, those folks and who make the Airbus. So you're going to see planes, especially things are going to be sold internationally with a variety of components coming to them. Cobham, I actually had a job offer from those folks one time. And they're in the UK. Bournemouth, Rolls-Royce, not, the Rolls-Royce, their aircraft engines are actually fairly generic. They're not, hugely expensive like their vehicles. Japan, obviously, they don't have much of an aircraft industry, but carbon fiber is probably something they are good at. And Italy, another one of the Airbus partners. So that's why a lot of that stuff was done. China, now we're getting into a little danger here. Now we're talking some technology transfer. But again, if you want to sell jets in China, you got to pay the piper. But you'll see that with the number of manufactured items. Wingtips in Korea and Saab making the access doors. So it's just sort of an example. Hard Rock Cafe is the other video on there. Hard Rock Cafe, again, like I said, Frito-Lay is a very well-run company and all that. Hard Rock, in my mind, is maybe not so much, but a company like, let's say, Disney, which would be an ideal example for this course, they aren't going to give away their data. All their forecasting, all their strategy stuff is all going to be proprietary. But Hard Rock is eager to give away information, so we'll talk more about it when you're watching the Hard Rock video. I'll comment more on it next week, just to kind of give you an insight on where I think what they're doing is right and wrong. But anyway, that'll be the example in that globalization part. So the Hard Rock Cafe one. Okay, so when a company's going to go overseas, they got different ways they can go. International strategy, global strategy, multi-domestic, and transnational. So you're going to need to kind of know these, but I'll show you a chart that makes it a bit easier. But it has to do with what the company's goals are. Are they just going to produce the same product they've always produced? Or are they going to adapt to that nation, to that culture? Or are they just going to be, above nations altogether, like a Coca-Cola or a Nestle or somebody like that? So I know it sounds a little confusing. Let me get you the graphic here in a second. We'll step through a few more slides. Boeing, worldwide, just like we showed. Benetton, they're getting a bit dated, kind of like an upscale Gap, mainly in Europe. Sony, kind of drawing back. Volvo, it was owned by Ford. Haier, anyway, Chinese. But anyway, they not a lot to take away from that last slide. But the thing is that the barriers, especially like we see here in Alaska, with the amount of air traffic going back and forth, the cargo, the world trade is just exploded, and it's the barriers are way down, and the fact is too that there's a lot of U.S. companies that have more of a foreign presence. It really has more to do with we've got kind of the highest corporate tax right now, which drives a lot of our companies to locate overseas to do. Anyway, we'll talk more about that at another point, but they'll, it's like Burger King took over the dead hockey player up in Canada. Tim Hortons, they took over the donut shop up there, and now Burger King is actually a Canadian corporation, when Tim Hortons is quite a bit smaller than Burger King, but now Burger King can claim they're a Canadian corporation, and oddly enough, Canada has lower taxes than we do, lower corporate taxes. And you see a whole bunch of, Apple and all these other people have all their money nested way over in Ireland. So anyway, a lot of those factors have encouraged companies to go overseas. And it's all good as long as the trade is semi-balanced. These are just some examples. And some of these things you may think they're a U.S. company, but maybe they're not. These ones are all pretty straightforward. But you look at the amount of their business, like Colgate, 72% outside of the U.S. Gillette over half again. Japan, obviously any company in Japan is going to do most of their sales outside. In some places like Switzerland, Nestle's does like, what, 98%? Yeah, overseas. So, anyway, Philips, Siemens. So, a lot of these companies, is it important where they're necessarily located? Not really, only to the accountants. Why do companies go overseas? Well, there's different reasons, but reduce labor costs, supply chain, better goods and services, understand markets, and attract global talent. But really, the things that most people looked at were the labor and the taxes, and that's the primary reason that companies were driven. Like I say, those reasons can change over time. We've seen that move, across Asia. First it was Japan, Korea, then China. Anyway, it all changes. Some of the things, these are all getting almost dated now. NAFTA, some of the treaties. There's a trade agreement being worked out right now, which is oddly it's supported by the president and the Republicans, but not by the Democrats. So anyway, those things are always difficult. It's supposed by the unions here. Improving supply chain. Sometimes, there's certain attributes that like California, for example, most vehicles, regardless of the make, regardless of whether they're Asian or U.S. manufactured, are designed in Southern California. And then perfume in France, which is still true, and shoes in China. But anyway, sometimes there's just certain attributes in terms of the creativity that will lend to certain aspects, certain reasons why why, given a choice, a company can gravitate to a certain location for that particular process. On-time deliveries, cultural variables, improved customer service. Sometimes there are some delays that happen if you're doing your manufacturing in one area and your customer base is in the other area. It would make sense to have that manufacturing closer by, but there's certain things, like there's a heating duct company that does its manufacturing in China, and then it sends all these components to Mexico, and then the ultimate customers are here in the U.S. And so that way it gets the ultra cheap labor in China, the moderately cheap labor in Mexico, but by being in Mexico for that final assembly, it's able to get the product up here pretty quick. So sometimes you come up with a hybrid scheme. Understanding markets to a certain extent, having exposure there, but again, design in Europe, no. Nokia is done. Cell phone fads from Japan. China's kind of taking the lead on that now, or at least, again, Apple in Korea. So Samsung and Apple. And then product life cycle. When we get into other subjects, there'll be more, concrete information in terms of testability. A lot of stuff tonight is kind of broad and overarching. My apologies. Free flow of ideas. Yeah. General Motors, they partnered with Toyota at a certain point to open up a manufacturing facility in California at one point to, kind of relearn quality. And again, they pretended that it was a Japanese concept, but again, if they would have just listened to Deming way back when, they wouldn't have been in those problems. Scandinavian ergonomic components, the IKEA kind of notion. Those things are definitely the folks have got that figured out. Attain regional or global talent to a certain extent. Now, a lot of times it has to do with the cost for employees. There's a lot of tech visas. That anyway, that program's kind of come under scrutiny lately, but that can be a reason. Now, these are some of the things they talk about, these cultural and ethical issues. Again, this has to deal, having lived in Turkey and places like that, what they consider unethical from us, they'd be very offended by some of the things we do. And just the same, if you went over there, you'd be very offended by the things they do. So this isn't necessarily a fair standard. Now, some of the things, obviously, with child labor, but bribery, you call it bribery. I call it an expediter's fee. At least that's what they called it. And you want to get it done, or don't you want to get it done? So thievery, I don't know that anybody's got the market on that. That is a problem. Lunch breaks. I lived in Spain for 4 years. A lunch break can turn into half a day, but was the nature of things. But anyway, it's tough to impose your standards on other folks. So we can talk more about that in subsequent chapters. But sending a U.S. manager to Spain to have them manage them like Americans is not going to work. And sending, trying to get a project done in the Middle East without the notion of baksheesh being paid is it's going to put you at a competitive disadvantage, let's just say. Other things, the political stability, that certainly can have a factor, and then the inflation. I've been in countries before where literally they issue new currency every year, so if you're holding cash, you've got real problems. But the main thing about this, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about locations later, is the fact that when a company goes, oh, we're going to move to country such and such because it's got cheap labor costs, you need to consider a lot more factors than that, and the fact that you're probably going to lose your entire labor force. You can't. You're making a decision that's largely irreversible. So sometimes companies go overseas. They're lured by the cheap rates, cheap labor rates, and then they find out that there's a lot more to it. So they're going to talk more about some of the different products. Where you think things are made or who makes them. So yeah, Lamborghini and Volkswagen, Alpo and Nestle. Not for their horse products, just for their dog food. Bridgestone, Firestone, and Braun. Sounds like a German brand. No, Procter & Gamble. But anyway, just kind of interesting. The funny thing is, too, about, where is it, India, Jaguar, that the Brits are kind of being recolonized. Tata bought Jaguar, one of the prestige British brands was bought by Tata. Tata's the folks who are trying to introduce a car for $2,000. And you see a lot of their big trucks overseas, but yeah, I've never seen one of their vehicles here. They're not known for being... again, this is a perfect description of quality. It's quality in terms of the fact that Indian in a lower strata wants to be able to have a vehicle that they can afford. So a Tata vehicle that's produced efficiently and meets their needs can be, considered very high quality from the eyes of that particular customer, because those are the attributes they're looking for, something that's reliable and in their price range. So for services, same sort of things, but yeah, it's more difficult because capacity, location, facilities, time, scheduling, all those different attributes. But the other thing is that services, unlike goods, goods are not produced and sold at the same location where services typically are. So not as prevalent to take those things overseas. Key factors. Not a whole lot to say about this. They're just going to go through just sort of an overview. This thing, in terms of quality and process analysis, this is something Southwest Airlines has a pretty good system. You may not know it, but the airlines themselves have, for the most part, well, in the history of the airline industry, the industry as a whole hadn't had a profitable year. I mean, there's individual airlines that have made money each year, but there's as a whole, the industry is unprofitable. And so Southwest came in and sort of changed things up by analyzing the process and didn't try to be this massive carrier that served every route. They just picked certain jets and certain routes and just really concentrated on the process part to do everything they're saying. So just flew 737s, flew the hell out of them. Employees that are only trained in one aircraft's a lot easier. Maintenance only have to work on one aircraft a lot easier. Good locations, great airports, and the fact that they're going to be employed tends to make your employees a little happier as well. So they're going to run through the steps here. Automated, no seat assignments, no meals, but it gets the cost down. Again, you've got these slides available in case you wanted to spend any more time. But the point about Southwest is there's a man, O'Leary, in Ireland, and a pretty well-to-do guy, and had the resources to open up his own airline. But before he did that, he came and he worked for Southwest for a number of years, and so he kind of did the Southwest thing on steroids. And he's, like it or not, if you've flown in Europe, you may have flown on Ryanair. And so what he did was, after working for Southwest for a number of years, 5 years or so, he came back and he opened up Ryanair, and just it's fairly brutal. It's I mean, you really want to go somewhere before you commit to flying Ryanair, but the fares can be very cheap. But you got to cross all the wickets. If you do anything like have extra baggage or any of that stuff, it can get pretty expensive. But there's an interesting interview. I loaded it up as one of the videos. The guy's kind of rough, very politically incorrect, but it is just, I think it's hilarious because it's the BBC is the interviewer, and she's just, she's very much of the British Airways type model and the very politically correct, and he's just a whatever, very insensitive kind of, but a great businessman. And he's, his company is very, very successful. But it's kind of funny. You have to look at some of the things they do. I mean, yeah, it's pounds, so, but that's not much more than dollars now if the exchange rate's changed. But yeah, trying to fly someplace for like $10. But they have all these silly fees charged for everything. Priority boarding, £5, reserve seat, lose your boarding card, or don't print it out yourself, £60. I mean, it can be a bit inordinate. And when you show up at the counter, they've got after you've checked your bags, if you did check your bags, you had to pay for that. There are no free bags, so at least £15. Pardon me. But after you do that, when you go to board the airplane, they have a scale and a credit card machine, and they weigh your carry-on. And if it weighs more than 10 kilos, like 22 pounds, again, you have to pay. And it's too late. You can't, well, you can throw stuff out, but that's it. You can't put it in your check luggage. So, interesting bit. If you listen to that video and do a little research, you'll learn about Ryanair. Anyway, I've flown a lot with them, but it's not always the most. It's kind of like a bad neighborhood in the air. But it can be fun, especially if you're a tourist. Okay, so this is what I was talking about in terms of the slide where we're going to talk about the international strategies and how they're going to kind of build. So we've got cost reduction characteristics and then local responsiveness considerations. So ultimately, there's going to be 4 circles out here. But the first one here is the international strategy. So what these guys are going to do is just do licensing type things. They're, first off, they aren't really going to customize their product. If you're buying a Harley Davidson in Germany, other than maybe having lights and stuff that comply with the local laws, you still want the Harley. You don't want necessarily the German version of the Harley. In steel, steel's kind of a commodity, so you don't necessarily, you can't even customize that. So, low cost reduction consideration and low local responsiveness. They're just trying to sell more of the product that they have to a different market. And then you get this global strategy. So cost reduction considerations are high. This is where, again, standardized product, but economies of scale. So they're really going after trying to save money by selling more of the product and this cross-cultural learning. So again, they're trying to adapt to a certain extent. So more than just licensing, they're adapting. And then multi-domestic. Here, for McDonald's overseas and Hard Rock, but McDonald's is probably a better example. They're going to use the sort of business model they had in, for example, McDonald's, but they're going to adapt it to the local culture. So, you go to a McDonald's in Europe and they aren't going to have a quarter pounder because that's kind of, doesn't make sense. So they'd have a hamburger McRoyal, kind of the same thing, but the sauce will probably be different. The French fries they'll be better because they'll fry them in regular lard like they used to here. And then they'll also have mayonnaise rather than ketchup, and they'll charge you for ketchup if you want that because that's kind of the custom, and they can. They'll have beer available. So anyway, it's the same. It's the same McDonald's, and it's completely recognizable as a McDonald's, but it is customized to that location. So they're not trying to hide that they're a U.S. company in this case. In fact, that might be part of the appeal. But again, they're going to tailor to the unique aspects. And then you get companies like Coca-Cola and Nestle's. Nestle's probably a better example because if you ask most people where Nestle's from, some people might know it's a Swiss company, but what they want to portray themselves as they're above national borders. Coca-Cola, I think, has a tougher time pulling this off because everybody knows that's a U.S. company. But anyway, a big mammoth company that is not recognized as being associated with any one nation is an example of that. Pardon me. This slide, I don't know that I agree with it. Again, it's Transparency International, ranking corruption. So people are going to look. This is included in the book, but it puts us down in the U.S. down in the middle. Certain companies around, but again, just based on my experience in being in the Middle East and stuff, it's what appears inappropriate for some cultures is maybe not inappropriate for others. Anyway, the homework for this week will be it's already out there in the assignments section. So if you go to the assignments, you'll see it there. You just type it in and it'll get checked off. So let me look back through the notes here and see if anybody said anything. This is just like a lot of talking just for an hour straight. That's a whole. Normally we have a 10-minute break in between. So, and then the NyQuil, puppies, a lot of stuff going on. Okay, so yeah, we will pick this up again next week. Look for some more emails and some more assignments. In terms of a due date on the homework, it needs to be turned in by the corresponding test. So the homework for, some people want to get ahead, and I'll try and get the lectures out there, certainly earlier than I did this time. But in terms of the due date, yeah, you just need to get it done before the first exam is done. And that exam, the way the exams will work on Blackboard too is I can open them up for, say, a week at a time, which I will do, so that when I say the exam is such and such a week, that's the starting date, and I'll go for the full 7 days there. So you'll have the opportunity to take it. Obviously, the final will be sort of the same way. You'll have a range in there to get that done as well. Any other questions? Anybody? All right. Well, nothing heard. Okay then. We will see you next week. Thanks.